And welcome to the latest Oxford Sparks Facebook Live. We are live from the RHS Chelsea Flower Show, joined by Professor John Frater, who has really put this garden and the inspiration behind it. John, thank you so much for having us here today. And tell me a bit about the garden and why it's called A Life Behind Walls.
Fantastic. Well, it's great to have you here. So this is a garden that is built on two themes, all within the field of HIV. One of the themes is to do with stigma, and that really underpins the whole way the garden was designed. It is about a young person diagnosed with HIV and coming to terms with that diagnosis and managing it and dealing with it and ending up with a life where they're living really well with HIV and successfully and doing everything they want to do. And tied into that theme is the idea of the research that we need to do to find a cure for HIV. So this is one of the most sort of crazy problems still out there. Some scientists say it's impossible. Some more optimistic ones think it's worth a try. And so we feel that that the ultimate way to get rid of stigma for HIV is to cure it. But while we're trying to do that, then what we want is to keep that conversation going around HIV, making sure people are aware of it, making sure about what it's like to be living with HIV and that people can live well, and wanting more acceptance in society. Our sort of the phrase that kind of goes with this garden, which is written on the bench that's behind us, is acceptance, not stigma, and that really sums up what the whole thing is about.
And can you tell us a bit about the different elements of the garden?
No, sure. So it was around 2 years ago. It takes so long to get all this together. So it was about 2 years ago I approached an amazing woman called Naomi Ferret-Cohen, who is a garden designer down in Sussex. And this has been a real collaboration between garden designers and doctors and researchers. And a lot of people thought we were crazy. Naomi came to visit young people with HIV. She came to the research lab to look at viruses being grown. She really kind of got ahead into the whole thing, and she tried to put herself into the mind of what it would be like if you were a young person diagnosed with HIV and the journey you would have to take. And she's translated that into a garden. And the way it starts is at the far end of the garden there's a large white pod, and that pod represents an NHS clinic, where you're given your diagnosis. Your life has changed, from one moment to the next, everything is different. You're now a person living with HIV. But within that white pod, you're cocooned by the staff who understand you, who can talk to you, and you can talk to them. And surrounding the pod, the planting is all very organised. It's very sort of just greens and whites, quite architectural, quite sort of standard, just reflecting that scene of being sort of in control. But, as with all things, at some point you've got to leave your cocoon and go out into the real world. And so in the garden there's a path that takes you down to the area where we're standing. But to get here, there are walls in the way. There are ugly black walls which are sort of crumbling, and they represent the stigma and the prejudice that so many people feel around HIV, and which we, in this garden, want to start breaking down. And the walls break down in this garden, and that's kind of what we're aiming to achieve. And you end up in this area here where we're standing, where the planting is colourful, it is light, it is kind of more freely planted. There's a beautiful acer with sort of casting dappled light, and there's an amazing bench where you can sit and just sort of take it all in. So it represents that journey that a young person would take when diagnosed with HIV, but actually, it applies to anybody with an HIV diagnosis, and actually even more broadly, anyone dealing with stigma or prejudice, this garden would sort of fit with what they're going through.
And can you tell us a bit more about kind of your research with HIV and how you got into it?
Yeah, no, sure. So I started off, possibly nearly 20 years ago, so it was in the late 90s, and HIV at that time was very much in the public eye. It had been recently discovered. People were terrified. People did not know what this virus was. People were terrified that if you just sort of spoke to someone with HIV or touched someone with HIV, you contracted that way. There was a massive government campaign. John Hurt was on the television with pictures of gravestones falling down, messages saying don't die of ignorance. There were leaflets through all our letterboxes saying HIV is everywhere, you will contract this unless you are careful. And generally speaking, there was sort of panic around what this virus would do. And it was at that time that I was lucky enough to be a junior doctor at St Mary's Hospital in Paddington in central London. And we were working on 2 wards, and there was, I think, 23 beds on each ward, and we were full of young people. I was a junior doctor back then, so they were my age, young people my age, with this condition that we didn't understand. And some of them would die, some of them would get better and go home. But it was very much those early days where we were trying to work out what was going on. So at that point then, I suddenly thought this is something I would like to be involved with as part of my career. And then from there it went into the research angle, where we started to ask different questions about this new virus and how to treat it, and it's kind of what future therapies might be like. So from kind of nearly 20 years worth.
And you say, it was in the news when it was first out and things like that. So have you found that the garden's actually raising the issue again and kind of bringing it to people's awareness?
Well, that is exactly the point. You've nailed it, because that is exactly what we do, because we feel very strongly that it has dropped out of public attention. And I think that's just, the public is sort of bombarded with messages all the time, different really worthwhile causes, but there are so many out there that you can't take them all in, and you can't respond emotionally to all of them. So you've got to find a different way of doing it. So that's why we thought this garden would be a fantastic thing. Because when I said to people we were going to do an HIV garden at Chelsea, they thought this was a crazy idea. They said, why? Why would you do that? But when you do something that's a little bit unusual or a bit out of the ordinary, and people question you and they question themselves why it's worth it, then that sort of naturally leads on to asking what the fundamental questions are underneath it. And we've had so many conversations here. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of visitors at Chelsea, and we have had so many conversations with people about HIV, about research, about stigma. And what is amazing, the number of people who've come up to us who've said, I know someone with HIV, there's someone in my family with HIV, I have HIV, I'm living with it, and it's just great to get those conversations going again. And with the media attention, which has been great, again, just getting people talking. And so many people have forgotten about this. Someone is infected somewhere in the world every 15 seconds, and a child is infected every 3.5 minutes somewhere. So this has not gone away, and people kind of think it has, and they need to know a little bit more that it is still going on, and we need to kind of thinking about it, and again, helping people living with it. Yeah.
And I was going to say, it's a collaboration with CHERUB as well, and could you just mention what they're aiming to do and
yeah,
everything?
So CHERUB underpins all of this. So CHERUB is a collaboration between 5 universities, so the University of Cambridge, Oxford, UCL, King's and Imperial, the last 3 in London, researchers and doctors from those universities, and also people living with HIV as well, all working together with the ultimate goal of trying to find a cure for HIV. So we felt, it must have been about sort of 8 years or so ago now, that if we were going to cure HIV, that we needed to do this together, because this is not the sort of thing you can do on your own in a little laboratory with a pipette just in a corner. This has to be a broad, collaborative effort, getting some of the best minds together thinking about this sort of problem. And so this organisation, this collaboration between 5 universities, who you wouldn't necessarily always think would be working well together, because it's a competitive world out there. So to bring 5 major institutions together to work on this concept has been really important, and it's been really successful. So we're really pleased with it.
And you mentioned just then about a cure for HIV. How close are we to maybe curing it?
So I think what is very clear is we are a long way away. And that is really important to realise that. And the reason we are still a long way away is because we are only starting really to understand the fundamental principles of why it is that HIV will persist so long, forever, potentially, in someone who is infected. We have spent the last 20 years trying to get drugs that work. That means that you can live well, drugs that stop the virus replicating, getting people tested, getting people identified if they're positive, and getting them on treatment and then looking after them. And that has been the concentrated effort to now. And actually a cure hasn't really been an issue up until now, but now that the drugs work, and if someone is diagnosed with HIV today and they can be started on therapy straight away and looked after well, their life expectancy is the same as someone who's HIV negative. And there are some studies that suggest it might even be longer, because you see a doctor every 6 months, and that doctor checks your blood pressure and your cholesterol and all those sort of things. So you're having a sort of regular health MOT. So, from that point of view, the people living with HIV may actually live longer than people who don't have it. But as we've got to that position, that chapter in some ways is closing, because we have treatment that works. And the question then we have to ask ourselves as researchers is that good enough? Have we done enough for the people living with HIV, or is there more to do? And the question I'm asked in my clinic, pretty much more than any other question, is, am I going to have to take these tablets forever? Is there going to be a cure? And when we talk to kind of the community of people affected by HIV, that is what they want. So I think there's a sort of a requirement on the research community. We are public funded, and we have to respond to what they want. And if there is a requirement to at least think about and try and work out how we might cure this infection, then that's what we should be doing. But we are very much in the early stages of really understanding the basic science. We have done some clinical trials of interventions that might work, and they have proved interesting, and they've given us a little bit of information, but none on their own are yet curative.
And we've probably got lots of viewers who are going, oh, I don't really know much about HIV and how it affects people. Can you kind of say a bit about how it does affect those?
No, that's a really good question. So HIV is something called a retrovirus. It is initially from the chimpanzee family, and it crossed over into humans over 100 years ago in West Africa. And what the virus does is it infects cells called lymphocytes, and a particular type of lymphocyte called a CD4 T cell. Now, these cells are very important for helping the immune system, and they're particularly important for helping fighting viruses and cancers and infections that get inside the cell itself. And the way HIV works is it gets inside these CD4 T cells and it stops them functioning, and they die off and they get killed. And when you lose these cells as a person, your immune system starts to fail. And people will be familiar with the concept of AIDS and HIV. And these are different things. It's really important to specify. HIV is the virus, and AIDS is the condition that you get when you've been infected for so long that your immune system has stopped working. And then what happens, when your immune system fails, you become susceptible to other conditions. You become susceptible to severe infections like tuberculosis or cytomegalovirus infection, these funny viruses we wouldn't even worry about normally. And you also get susceptible to cancers, because our immune systems and our T cells also control our cancers. So there are various cancers, some of which are related to infections themselves, which then we start seeing in people with HIV. And an example of that is something called Kaposi sarcoma, which is related to a herpes virus. And again, when you lose immune control of that, you get this cancer. And so then you need to be treated, and sometimes you need chemotherapy as well. So that's when your immune system breaks down, and that's what the virus will do.
And bringing it back to, the Chelsea Flower Show, it's 5 deep, people are looking at the garden. Have you had a good response from it, and a positive response?
It has been absolutely phenomenal. And we question so much about this. I'm used to sitting in a research lab in a research office or at a conference looking at posters, and this is such a different environment. And yet the conversations we've had here have been so refreshing because it's a different audience. And the questions are different, and it makes you think about things differently. So I think it's been a two-way process. So many people had really interesting questions and didn't know about HIV and AIDS and sort of forgotten about it. And to get that working as well, but also the way the questions are asked, because it's a different audience, you start to think about things differently yourself. What are my research priorities? Am I asking the right questions? Am I going about it the right sort of way? So it's been a great success.
And what's kind of next for the garden? I mean, obviously it gets packed down. Is there a future for the garden and people can engage with it?
Yeah, so this amazing garden has to be removed in 48 hours as of this weekend, which is an enormous undertaking. So all of this has to go, and it's being taken to different places. So some of the planting is going to a London council, where they're going to be using it as a garden for people with Alzheimer's, with dementia, to kind of help with their sort of therapy and help plant that. The hard landscaping, the dome and the bench here, much of that is going to be moved to Oxford, and it's going to be rebuilt and replaced as an HIV garden. So we're going to keep that concept of HIV and a garden about stigma and acceptance still going up there. So that's the plan.
And finally, John, I have to ask, to finish on kind of a positive note, for those that are watching that maybe have, HIV, there is that stigma. Don't worry about it. Is the kind of overall message to, be part of society and not think, that there isn't any stigma anymore.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, only the people living with HIV know how it feels. I mean, it's all very well for me as a doctor to say kind of what is going on. But at the end of the day, it's the people who have to take those tablets every day, who have that reminder every day that they're HIV positive, who have to work through that stigma. And so many people will not talk about this. So many people will not tell brothers or sisters or friends or other family members. And it's a way of trying to kind of open up the conversation so that people feel comfortable to do that. So it's not an instruction to people living with HIV, because it's us as society who need to change the way we think so they feel confident and comfortable about talking about how they feel. And that's what we want to achieve here.
Well, I have to say it looks beautiful, and thank you very much. So thank you for joining us for our first Facebook Live. We will be back here at 3 p.m. Where John will be interviewing more about the research and about the Oxford University. So please tune back in here at 3 p.m.